In color, there are more chemicals involved. The same number of steps, but the steps are slightly different. After the developer, you don't use a stop. Next step is Blix. And Blix is a fixer, yes, but there's also a bleach in there. So it's a different step than fix itself. It's a more, while you're working with it, it's making bubbles and the top keeps coming off and stuff. So it's a little fidgetier, you might say, than the black and white process in these stages. Then after that, there's a stabilizer you use, and the stabilizer just has to be on the film as it dries. So a few more steps there, little more, in my opinion, a little more chemically than black and white, even though if you're using, some of the really interesting historic and still used pyro developers, they're pretty interesting chemically too. So, and then mixing the chemicals, I think, is just a little bigger deal. But the great thing about it is you're targeting a higher temperature. So if you want to go right to work when you're mixing your chemicals for color, using those high temperatures isn't a problem. It's actually a good thing. So you're mixing out that temperature roughly of what you're going to use it at. When you do the dilution at the end, you're always withholding, like say, for a liter of chemicals, withholding, say, 300 milliliters. You can temper that, either make it hot to keep the temperature hot or make it cold to bring the temperature down a little bit. So you can be ready to go, bang, right after you mix. I kind of like that. So mixing is a bigger deal. Then during the process, the temperature has to be higher than it does. So you have room temperature for almost everything, I do anyway, in black and white developing. So you don't have a big deal about controlling temperature. When it's cold in my basement, I do a little bit of tempering of the metal stuff that seems so cold, and I try and warm up my fixer now. I used to just leave it in that window. But in general, temperature is not an issue. You have to keep these chemicals, the Blix and the developer, up around 102 degrees. So you're going to have a hot bath. I've done two different ways. I've had a hot bath of 110 degrees, and I keep checking the temperature of that bath. And that seems to be able to sustain in plastic bottles now the chemicals once they get to the 102. I prefer using what's called a Sous Vide, which is a cooking device. It keeps a bath of water at a specific temperature for you. You set the temperature, you set the time, and you just keep the water constantly, and it kind of agitates water bath around your bottles too. So I recommend a Sous Vide. That's one of my tips. Get a Sous Vide if you're going to do color at home. If you're just experimenting with color, that's an expense of around $100. I would withhold that until you like doing this, until you've seen the chemicals at work in your basement. You get to get comfortable, use one pack of color chemicals first. And then if you're like, no, this is easy, and I think you will find it easy and enjoyable, then and affordable, really, then go ahead and splurge on the Sous Vide. It'll make the rest of your career in color developing more enjoyable. Then when I first started doing color, that was the first I'd ever seen instructions having us agitate every 30 seconds. Somehow or other, roughly around that time, I switched apps or something on how I was developing black and white film. And ever since, all my black and white film, I agitate every 30 seconds during the developing, during the fix. And I actually think it's really good to agitate every 30 seconds. I think it's, for me, maybe it's an age thing. It's easy to forget you're timing something if you're only going back to it every minute. And 30 seconds, you say, well, okay, I'm going to wash these funnels and measuring things, and then I'm going to do my agitation. You'll find little chores that take exactly 30 seconds that you can mix in there and go back and agitate. Okay, now I'm going to walk to the bathroom, turn on the shower so that I have a nice damp room in the shower in the basement to dry the film and keep the dust down in that space. Walk back, do an agitation, go back to the shower, turn it off. You'll find ways at 30 seconds to keep the process continuous. I found that at a minute, sometimes I would get preoccupied maybe with the news on my phone or something and miss the timing in a little bit of way. I don't think I ever messed anything up, but it's just irritating to get out of your flow that way. So I really like the 30 seconds, even though it was something to get used to. So I might have mentioned some of these already, but the pros, I think, far outweigh the cons, even though maybe my list is shorter on the pros. The timing is simpler. Unless you push or pull film, the timing is the same every time. Once you get late into your chemical life, there's a formula. We'll talk about that. There's a formula to use to correct for the age or the number of rolls this film has already developed, so that you're getting really consistent results throughout. Let's say you're going to shoot 20 rolls through there. I think I usually go maybe closer to 16, but 20 rolls, if you're not taking any longer than a couple months to develop your 20 rolls, 3 months maybe, that developing pack is going to get you all the way through there. And that said, it's like $1 or $2 a roll outside of your time effort. It brings your investment in how much you spend per roll to develop way down. Your first 2 rolls, probably your out-of-pocket is roughly the cost of your chemicals at that point. Not including the sous vide, you're going to have to amortize that over years instead of just over a couple rolls, but your chemicals you paid for in a couple rolls, depending on what lab you use or if you ship or not. Since the timing is simpler, your time dedicated per tank can be quicker than doing, let's say, a high ISO black and white film with a very dilute, which I like to use, a very dilute developer. So let's say we're talking, I pushed Tri-X to 1600 and I'm using Rodinal 1:50, which is a fantastic combination, by the way. I don't know what the timing is, but it's going to be longer to develop that tank than it will be to develop a color tank. It's oddly, even though you're doing more, it seems like you're doing more stuff. And when you do the Blix, it's like 6.5 minutes, and that seems kind of long. But guess what? Your fix is either 4 or 5 minutes already, so now you're only talking about marginal 2.5 minutes. Your developer in C41 is 3.5 minutes, so now you're never going to develop less than that 6 minutes. So it's quicker. It's quicker to do color. It's a joy once you really get into the flow of it. I haven't done it for a while because I've really been concentrating on black and white, so I'm looking forward to what we do today. And that said, it's not a one-shot process, which is a pro, right? You're reusing your chemical. So if you're just doing color at home, your shelf is your little bottle of stabilizer, your liter of developer, and your liter of Blix. That's it. I mean, for my color work, I've got backup bottles of Fix, I've got backup bottles of Hypo Clear, I don't even want to know how many developers, but I got a lot of different developers mixed downstairs, and it's a mess. It's a lot of stuff. You can have a very tight, clean little operation that fit in a small box, that you can lug off to a closet or something, if that's the way you're storing your chemicals. And color is just much tidier. Even though, once you work with it, to me, it's fidgetier. I'm tempted more to wear gloves. I don't usually when I'm working with the Blix and such. So, tips. I already mentioned use a sous vide to control the temperature. And there's a couple more complicated tips that I'm going to put in a special video together. But I'll go down, I'll film some of my process today,